Did you know that 97% of Americans are deficient in omega-3s? While omega-3s are often correlated with fish and fish oil, we here at Ascent Nutrition uniquely water extract our omega-3s from algae, the source of omega-3s. For a limited time, try Ascent Nutrition's algae oil DHA at goascentnutrition.com and use discount code SUMMER10 for 10% off. That's SUMMER10 for 10% off at goascentnutrition.com.
Just seconds ago, the president went to Truth Social and typed this. It has been fully agreed by and between Israel and Iran that there will be a complete and total ceasefire. Complete and total ceasefire is what he typed.
World War III / the invasion of Iran is officially on pause at this moment in time, and the people that are most angry right now are the neoconservatives and the anti-war hustlers that sell you on the idea that every time there's an incident at any point in time between the United States and Iran, we are going to end up at war with them. This was all a part of the plan. War is imminent, and you know it's imminent because they've been telling you so for nearly 20 years and have been wrong each and every time. Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Sean, and today we are going to do something interesting. Today we're going to look back on my prediction on how I thought this whole conflict, this whole skirmish between the United States, Israel, and Iran would break down versus all the people who told you that war was inevitable. There was no going back for this, because I think it's instructive to understand that we live in a world where constantly panicking, constantly predicting the end of the world has absolutely no consequences. These people are never asked to be accountable for their positions, while I actually sign my name to my predictions, take all the heat from you guys out there in the audience who tell me that I shouldn't talk about foreign policy, and then end up being proven right because my predictions are based on reality, not what will get the most clicks. But before we get into that, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay.
So I knew the worm was churning on this particular issue when I started noticing the prominent so-called anti-war accounts on social media starting to pivot, starting to hedge on the issue, starting to say, well, you know what? Even though I was predicting war with Iran and I was predicting that it would spiral out of control and that this would be a regime change war a la Iraq, a la the overthrowing of the Libyan government, a la Afghanistan, the fact is, if we don't end up in a war, this will be due to the undeniable restraint of the Iranians. And of course, I immediately started calling that out on social media because these people were well beyond that point. I mean, we saw constant posts by people saying that the U.S. shouldn't send men to die for Israel. Candace Owens said white men were going to go die for Israel, and a bunch of other people jumped on that train. And without hesitation, now that there appears to be a ceasefire deal in the works, these people have dusted themselves off, will pretend like you don't remember anything, and then the next incident the United States has with Iran, they'll come right back around and sell you on the same bullcrap. Meanwhile, on this channel, I laid out my predictions quite clearly, based it on facts and reality, and I think it's important that we play clips of me being correct, me being right, me being 100% dead on accurate, because it's crucial for you to understand what it's like to actually have to live up to the things that you said in the past. And he's also putting the pressure on the Ayatollah in order to force him into a surrender, which, by the way, is unsurprising because President Trump likes to threaten people with military force way more than he likes to actually engage in warfare. If you guys will recall, the way that he forced Kim Jong-un to the table back in the day was that he kept threatening escalation with North Korea. A lot of people reported that the U.S. was going to go to war with North Korea at the time, but ultimately what we ended up seeing was that this was all a part of the strategy. And this has been a repeated strategy throughout his presidency to threaten people over and over again in order to get them to the table. And in my opinion, this is part of the bluff factor or the bolstering of American power or stating American power without actually intending on using it. Again, I don't think, in my genuine opinion, that President Trump wants to send U.S. troops to Iran. And this is why I'm incredibly skeptical of all these different various people who never take accountability for their predictions, and why I land squarely in the camp of nothing ever happens ever, and I hope that all of you will join me, because the fact is, there is a such thing as a limited military engagement that is short of boots on the ground and a U.S. invasion and U.S. soldiers dying. And by the way, to be clear, I don't want any U.S. soldiers to die for Israel or U.S. citizens, but the fact is, nobody's really asking for that. I mean, sure, you can find people in the Israeli government who are like, the U.S. needs to join us in our strikes against Iran. That definitely exists. We also are probably getting pressure from Saudi Arabia, who's Iran's natural enemy, being a Sunni power near Iran as the Shia power. But the fact is, this is not a thing that I believe we are being dragged towards at this moment in time. And this isn't something that I think President Trump is willing to burn his legacy on. Now, it's important for you guys to note that that particular video where I compared this to the North Korea ratcheting up the rhetoric kind of situation came out prior to Trump calling for regime change on social media, because I've seen him do this multiple times, and you don't get into any bigger threat territory than nuclear threats, which is what he threatened versus North Korea, and he was able to walk that back in order to get them to the negotiation table, because this is a part of President Trump's foreign policy strategy. In addition to that, one of the things that I often also highlighted was the way that Israel went after Hezbollah, because they started bombing them right after October 7th, the north of Israel, displacing Israelis, which was to hit Hezbollah as hard as possible, as quick as possible, in order to push them into a surrender. And by the way, almost all of the predictors that said that this would lead to U.S. war with Iran said that that would lead to U.S. intervention with Lebanon. But the fact is, that strategy absolutely worked. So what I was doing, rather than panicking, rather than posting the thing that would get the most clicks, was actually basing it on the way that these two parties, the United States and Israel, have acted in the recent past. Trump with North Korea, by the way, Trump with hitting Soleimani too, because he did the same thing after he killed that guy, the number 2 in the Iranian government, and the way that Israel engaged with Lebanon, because the recent paths should be a good way for us to predict what is likely to happen in the future. And as many people have pointed out, Trump has said multiple times that he didn't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. In fact, there's a compilation of him saying that.
You cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon. You cannot let it happen, because bad things will happen if that happens. But everybody stopped. They were ready to make a deal. We would have made a deal that was great for everybody. No nuclear weapons. You can't give them nuclear weapons. Now they're going to have a nuclear weapon. Don't let Iran have nuclear weapons. That's my only thing I have to tell you today. Don't let them have it. They would have never had them, including Iran. They can't have a nuclear weapon. That's all. They can't have nuclear weapons. It's too destructive, too powerful. They can't have it. But I wanted to make a deal with them. No nuclear weapons. You can't have nuclear weapons.
So for me on this channel, it was very easy for me to understand how the United States of America would likely proceed, which was possible limited strikes on their nuclear facilities, which, by the way, we're not technically making nuclear weapons at this moment in time. However, they did enrich uranium beyond the 5% that is needed for energy all the way to 60%. And it's actually easy to go from 60 to weapons grade, which is around 90% enrichment. But yeah, I knew that they were going to try to do this, and I knew after the fact they were going to try to push for some kind of a deal, some kind of a ceasefire, because if you'll remember, the reason these strikes occurred is because Iran blew past the 60-day deadline that was set up by the Trump administration before he promised them immense pain. So in my opinion, once you draw that red line, whether you like the intervention or not, you have to follow through on it, because when you're the Obama administration and you draw a red line in Syria and you don't follow through, that ends up signaling the world that you are to be taken advantage of. Again, it is in fact America first to project a strong image out there in the world. It is stated American policy to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. And this strategy I fully believed and stated publicly multiple times I thought would work, and it would not lead to a war. So everybody who said otherwise is in fact wrong, dead wrong. And by the way, I didn't just post about this in that YouTube video. I also posted about this on Twitter. So this is me responding to the Hodge twins that we're going to talk about a little bit later on this channel. And I was responding to their posts about how they were making a list of fake America First people who have been silent around de-escalating and ending this war. And then he said, remember the few of us that have been against against war from the beginning. And I responded by saying you should make a list of all the people who have never heard of Trump ratcheting up the rhetoric or using limited force to push an enemy to de-escalate. And then I said it's hilarious how the never believe the government folks take every threat of military action 100% at face value. So again, I'm on record pointing out that Trump does like to ratchet up the rhetoric in order to try to push people in order to get them to do what he wants. And I pointed out that he has utilized in the past limited military strikes without starting a full-scale war. And by the way, while there's varying reports on the level of damage that we've done to the nuclear facilities that were hit by the US bombs and how long this could delay the potential for their nuclear program, the fact is we did hit those facilities. We did some damage to those facilities. Trump says they're absolutely wiped out, but most people say that they're actually hit hard but not completely destroyed, and that will lead to delays in their nuclear program. And it seems to, as of right now, push the Iranians into just a symbolic response against the United States and coming back to the table in order to discuss with them, which is a good thing. Again, sometimes using a threat of force is necessary in order to actually push forward the peace process.
What it means, Brett, is quite simple. First of all, the president, without, knock on wood, having a single American casualty, obliterated the Iranian nuclear program. We are now in a place where we weren't a week ago. A week ago, Iran was very close to having a nuclear weapon. Now, Iran is incapable of building a nuclear weapon with the equipment they have because we destroyed it. So that's a very, very big thing. Now, what that means, I think, is we have to talk to Iran and, of course, to Israel about what the future holds. Because while we have obliterated the Iranian nuclear program, our hope and our expectation is that they're not going to try to rebuild that program. And I think that's what the president is really trying to figure out here, is to build a long-term settlement here to where we can have peace in the region, where our regional allies and, of course, the American people, most importantly, can be secured, but where we can ensure that the destruction of the Iranian nuclear program that has already happened is not something they try to rebuild.
But despite the fact that this is one of the very consistent things that the Trump administration has done at time and time again in terms of foreign policy, you have all these different various people who are total naysayers saying that, oh, no, absolutely not. This will never work. And included in the bunch, and by the way, included in the people that I made fun of, is Dave Smith, who again, on Breaking Point, said that we are past the point where the Iranians cannot respond with force, and essentially Trump is an idiot for asking them to negotiate and talking about peace, and he compared the strikes on Iran to Pearl Harbor against the United States and Japan asking the Americans, FDR in particular, to negotiate after Pearl Harbor.
That the Iranian, the missiles that they sent last year toward Israel, as many of us guessed, that wasn't really their best. They were intentionally making an attack that wouldn't really hurt anybody, that wouldn't really lead to a war, which Iran has done over and over again. But now we've pushed them to the point where they probably don't feel that they have the option not to respond. And Donald Trump telling them to come back to the negotiating table now is a joke. Yeah. I mean, what a impotent leader to be sitting there talking about coming back to the negotiating table. It's like sitting after Pearl Harbor and telling FDR, now's the time to go negotiate with the Japanese. Right. Negotiations are over now. The time for negotiations was before that.
Now, again, I highlight this not because Dave Smith was totally 100% wrong in his prediction, but because, of course, he decided to hedge and say, oh, we're relying on Iranian restraint in order to prevent this war. Therefore, he's still right, even if the war that he unambiguously was making it clear that he saw coming doesn't actually happen, which is absolutely absurd. And again, I got into it with him on this particular topic in Twitter. I will link the thread in the description if you care about that sort of thing. But the fact is, a bunch of these people who hold the anti-war stance don't actually stand by their predictions. And considering I'm somebody who's anti-war, I don't want to invade Iran or get entangled in all these foreign countries. I find it really annoying that I get all this crap and all this heat when I point out the most likely outcome, as if I'm somebody who's pushing for a full-scale invasion or something ridiculous like that, when all I'm doing is analyzing the facts based on what I've seen before from the Trump administration and the countries that are involved and making the most logical assessment. Of course, you don't get rewarded for that. What you get rewarded for is telling people war is imminent, telling them it's definitely going to happen, talking about how you called it, you got it right, you nailed this one, and then when it doesn't happen, happen, you say, oh, well, this other reason is why it didn't happen, and I'm never going to acknowledge why I was wrong. Now, of course, I mentioned the Hodge twins earlier on, and little did I know that when I quote tweeted them and made fun of them making a list of all the non-loyal America First people, that they would actually end up embarrassing themselves in a ridiculous way by posting different messages, taking different positions depending on the platform. They actually have a post on the Hodge twins Facebook page that has since been deleted where they embraced and endorsed Trump's strikes on Iran, but on X, they're talking about how, oh, we're gonna die for Israel and this is the end of the world. I mean, here's their Facebook post. President Trump just unleashed, all caps, American might, ordering a devastating, all caps, attack on Iran's nuclear sites at Fordo, Natanz, and Esfahan, crushing their dangerous ambitions. For 14 years, President Trump has been crystal clear Iran cannot have nukes, and he's followed through with a historic strike that's got the world in awe. A full payload of bombs, all capitals, rained down, and our brave warriors made it home safe. Despite the fake news from Axios claiming that President Trump might allow Iran's uranium enrichment, he shut that down. And then they quote him from True Social saying, "We will not allow any enrichment of uranium," close quote. Democrats and their media pals are scrambling, crying foul, but patriots know Trump is keeping America and Israel safe. Iran is chanting, quote, "death to America," while funding terror groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. Trump's message, quote, "Iran must agree to end this war. It's time for peace through strength." Like if you stand with Trump's bold action, comment MAGA to show Iran who's boss, share to slap down the Democratic lies. Hashtag Trump 2025, hashtag America First, hashtag no nukes for Iran. Now, if you compare that to his post on X, it says, "Looks like the panicans were right. The neocons got U.S. bombs dropped on Iran for Israel like they wanted. There's nothing exciting about war. The only thing we can do now is pray for peace and pray this doesn't escalate. We are proud that we spoke up against this potential war." I mean, guys, come on. Come on, guys. That's two posts from the same social media users. Just one is on Facebook, where you have more pro-Israel boomers, where they talk about how Trump is standing with America and Israel and how proud they are of that. And then on X, where people are more anti-Israel, he's talking about how, oh my God, it's terrible that we dropped these bombs. We did it for Israel. And oh my God, it looks like we're headed for that potential war with Iran. Now, of course, when confronted with this obvious contradiction, this obvious example of pandering to two different audiences based on the platform on which those audiences can be found, the Hodge twins completely took accountability for their lies. They said, you know what? You caught us. We were double pandering. We apologize for this. We promise to be more legit and actually take one position on an issue at a time. No, of course they didn't do that. I'm totally kidding. They decided to come up with two different excuses for why this occurred. And by the way, anytime you bring up two different excuses for the same error, for the same mistake, we know that you're lying. If y'all didn't already see we getting dragged because of our Facebook account posts, we post our personal takes on X and have a social media employee that posts on Facebook because we don't have time, but we weren't checking before they were posted. Some of the posts on Facebook were written by ChatGPT and did not match what we post on X. Posts were all public for everyone to see. We weren't hiding anything. We deleting those posts on our Facebook and taking accountability for being dumb. We are also hiring a new social media person. If anybody looking for a job, by the way, we are still anti-war, Keith and Kev. Yeah, so the reason for this discrepancy that happens to perfectly line up with the audiences that they were targeting for these posts on X versus Facebook actually had nothing to do with them obviously pandering to both audiences. It had to do with a rogue social media employee that, of course, they're firing because whatever they posted didn't align with the Hodge twins' values. Also, in addition to that, they're using ChatGPT to write the posts, so it's a social media employee and ChatGPT writing the posts, and they're not checking up on either one of them. Again, two excuses for the same thing is usually indicative of a lie. Imagine that you are dating somebody romantically and they're late getting home, and you ask them, "Why'd you get home late?" And they say, "Oh, honey, don't worry about it. I was working late, but also I was visiting a sick friend in the hospital." Obviously, that person is lying. Spoiler alert, that person is very likely cheating on you. You should be alert, because two different excuses compounding at the same time without prior notice usually is indicative of a lie. This is what we're seeing right here. They're saying it was an employee that they had to fire for being an employee that sucked, but also it was ChatGPT, so I guess they got to fire AI as well. And by the way, isn't it weird that they're using ChatGPT to generate posts for their social media rather than giving their authentic takes on these particular issues? Again, this is what I'm up against. This is what, by the way, huge people in my own audience are attacking me for not aligning with, even though this is the most disingenuous nonsense of all time. And I just bumped the microphone. And by the way, everyone who cowardly, and I mean absolutely cowardly, made their predictions that we were going to send U.S. soldiers to go die in Iran for Israel or some other ridiculous proposal, that now that there's a ceasefire deal that's potentially in effect, have decided to turn around and say not that they were wrong, not take ownership of their positions, but actually they were just being anti-war. And it's really messed up that all these people are just churning on them for being anti-war, when in reality they were just against war. Ridiculous. No respect for you guys at all whatsoever. Again, own up to your positions. If we actually did send troops into Iran, if we actually had a broader escalation than what I was predicting as a potential result, I would have to come to you guys, my own audience, who actually expect me to be accountable for the things that I say, and admit that I was wrong, and I would 100% do that. These people have no such obligation, because they always hide behind the virtue of just being anti-war, when the fact is they made specific predictions about where they thought this was going. They said that the evil orange man was basically George Bush 2.0, and they were totally wrong, and they never will acknowledge it. And again, they'll dust themselves off and do the same thing the very next time an incident pops up with Iran. And by the way, if you guys want a handy dandy guide to how Trump tends to work in these foreign policy situations, I actually put out a list on my X account that I will read for you right now. So this is a 6-step process on how Trump ends up working in terms of his foreign policy. 1, you have the initial offer. In this particular case, it was the 60-day deadline for them to reach a new nuclear deal that the Trump administration was satisfied with. Then, of course, you have the threats of force. Step 2. This is when Trump was saying, oh, you better watch out. If you don't actually come to the table and make a deal, then you're going to feel some might from the U.S. military force. Now, right after that, we go to possible strikes, where maybe the president will order some kind of military action to show the foreign foe that we mean business. Now, again, the reason this is possible strikes and not actual strikes is because even though we've seen this in Iran in this particular incident, and we saw it with the killing of Soleimani, we actually had another incident where Trump actually called off the strikes at the last minute because he didn't think the strikes would be worth it in the long run. Also, you have the North Korean negotiation, where he did not actually engage in strikes despite the fact that he threw out the threats. Now, after that, we get the crazy threats from President Trump. This is where we get the total threats of annihilation from President Trump, usually on social media. In the North Korea context, it was when he said that his red button is bigger than Kim Jong-un's red button, and it actually works. In that particular case, he was threatening nuclear war to show you how extreme this gets. But in the Iranian case, he was talking about regime change and all these different other things that, again, were very harsh threats post the strikes that were the initial ones that, again, are all a part of this process. Right after that, what do we get to? The let's make a deal portion of this. And again, we saw this with the North Korea meeting. We saw this with the posts on social media after threatening total annihilation. And then, of course, this follows up with him talking crap about our ally, saying that, you know, in certain ways, they're kind of just as bad as our foe, which, by the way, we've also already reached that point.
Says that Iran violated the peace agreement and the ceasefire agreement. Do you believe that Iran is still committed to peace?
Yeah, I do. They violated it, but Israel violated it too.
Are you questioning if Israel is committed?
Israel, as soon as we made the deal, they came out and they dropped a load of bombs, the likes of which I'd never seen before. The biggest load that we've seen. I'm not happy with Israel. You know, when I say, okay, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on them. So I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning, because the one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. I'm not happy about that.
Now, while it might be fair to say that Trump doesn't have a true foreign policy doctrine, like a philosophy that undergirds it, if you look at this 6-step process and realize that he circles back to 1 after 6, then you realize that this is essentially where all of the conflicts end up going, with all of the foreign leaders that are designated enemies of the United States or stated enemies of the United States. And again, this is a method that you can rely on repeatedly, and this is based largely on the fact that Trump likes to threaten military action, which, by the way, sometimes can be good. It can actually help you achieve your goals, but doesn't actually want to be a president that starts new wars. Now, some people will call this peace through strength. Some people will call this a show of force in order to prevent escalation. Whatever you want to call it, it makes no matter. But acknowledging that this is a pattern of behavior that we've seen repeatedly from President Trump is not the same thing as being a pro-war neocon. And again, not acknowledging this is either due to extreme ignorance or a completely disingenuous reading of how the previous Trump administration worked. So once again, I will state my position absolutely clearly for all you guys out there in the audience. I am not somebody who is pro the invasion of Iran or anything of the sort. I think we are too involved in military conflicts, specifically in the Middle East. However, that doesn't mean that every time that there's a blip that comes up anywhere in the world, I'm going to pretend that it's World War III. Now, this also doesn't mean that I'm against all military actions at any point in time against any target to any scale, because the fact is sometimes a show of force can prevent further fighting down the line. And usually, because I'm analyzing these situations on a case-by-case basis, when I feel like a limited military action could end up preventing a broader military action, I'm going to throw my support behind it. Now, I know a bunch of people are going to deliberately misinterpret that because they can't argue against the position, but you know what? That's where I'm going to leave it. As per usual, if you like this video, then show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. It's been me talking about the absolute nonsense surrounding foreign policy in recent memory. Till next time.